Greetings, friends. This is Chris Batts, your host of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. In today's episode, I spoke with an attorney who loves being at the crossroads of sports and business. We discussed his journey to becoming General Counsel of first a specialty sports retailer and now the GC of a national sports organization. We discussed his leadership approach, current issues in sports, and advice for attorneys wanting to land a role in the sports industry, and so much more. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a review on iTunes. We interview corporate defense leaders, partners, general counsel, and legal consultants. You are listening to episode 53 of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast.
Broadcasting from Kansas City, this is the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. In each episode, you'll receive actionable ideas and hear personal leadership stories of both men and women serving as leaders and executives in the legal industry. Enjoy a front row seat as Chris Batts speaks with general counsel, legal consultants, and law firm leaders and law partners at the top corporate defense law firms from around the United States.
Welcome to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Batts with the Lion Group. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Norm Wain, General Counsel and Chief of Business Affairs for USA Track and Field in Indianapolis. USA Track and Field is the national governing body for the sport of track and field, long-distance running, and race walking in the United States. Norm's responsibilities included managing all business and legal affairs for the organization. Prior to Norm joining U.S. Track and Field, he was the Vice President of Corporate Legal Affairs at The Finish Line, a U.S. billion-dollar publicly traded athletic specialty retailer, where he's responsible for the legal department. He's also worked in the Business and Legal Affairs Department at Writers and Artists Agency, a prestigious L.A. talent agency later purchased by Paradigm. He is a member and on the board of the Sports Lawyers Association. Norm is also an adjunct professor at Indiana University, where he teaches a sports law course. He has spoken at both domestic and international conferences and seminars on many sports law-related topics. Norm received his undergrad from the University of California, Berkeley, and his law degree from Pepperdine. Welcome, Norm, to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Chris. I'm really appreciative and honored to be here.
Norm, you've got an exciting story of your journey and career in sports and law. I'd like to just start with going to law school. Was it always your intention to be in the business of sports, or how did that evolve for you? Be curious to hear.
Yeah, it was definitely always my intention to be in the business of sports. I remember thinking long and hard the year right after my 1L year, because law school is a lot of work, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, and it's not the most fun experience, but there's a benefit to the way that they retrain you how to think, if you will, like a lawyer, and the process of doing all that work. And so I thought about it, and I was contemplating like, wow, this is a big investment financially. It's a big investment of time. And I want to make sure that when I'm done, that I'm doing something that I'm super passionate about. To me, it was more important to have a career and a job that I was passionate about more so than financial success or anything like that. And so as I was debating it, I knew that I was going to finish law school because I was going to finish what I started. And then two was I was going to use it as a key to open doors depending on which professional path I ended up ultimately pursuing. So that was kind of my approach coming out of law school. I'm a soccer fanatic. My parents were born and raised in South America, in Argentina. So I grew up with barbecues and soccer games since I was really little, followed it. And that summer, I reached out to what was professional soccer in Southern California. At the time, this was pre-Major League Soccer. So I'm dating myself here. But I reached out to the general manager there. It was a gentleman named Rick Davis. He played on the New York Cosmos with, Pele and Beckenbauer and Canalia and all these great soccer players. And so he was a general manager of a team called the LA Salsa. And I had graduated from Berkeley and reached out to him while I was in law school and said, listen, I'm willing to do whatever it takes here. I've got time over the summer. I'm willing to work for nothing. Is there anything that I can do to help out? And he was really appreciative and said, yeah, he let me do just about anything that I wanted. So, I mean, not necessarily what I wanted, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I was filling the coolers for the referee at halftime. I was, preparing things pregame. I was up in the press box. I sat with him on the bench. I did marketing stuff. We did surveys to try to figure out what are the best game times, trying to help promote the sport and the events that they were taking place. And so that really gave me an inside look early in my career on the business of sport, how it's monetized, what that product is, because sport in and of itself is unique because you're kind of selling an experience, right? We can both go to a baseball game and it's a 1-0 pitcher's duel. You might think, wow, this is awesome. These guys are really throwing. I might be yawning and bored beyond belief because nobody's scoring runs. Like, what's happening here? So it's really about an experience, which makes it unique. And so monetizing the business of sport was something that was always interesting to me. And that was kind of the start. And so from there, I was able to land at MLS before their inaugural season. And I was thrilled as heck to be there. I was probably their first intern. I was in early. I stayed late. I did just about anything and everything they asked me to do. And again, just learning the way, putting together the binders for the owner operators at the time was really exciting. And I was just absorbing it all like a sponge, just trying to understand, again, the business side of what they were trying to do to promote the sport.
And when that internship wrapped up at MLS, what were those next steps for you to land kind of a real paying job that you were looking to take?
At that point, so I had stayed through the inaugural season. I had gone to the final in Boston, which was took place during a monsoon. I mean, I remember swimming in my sneakers through that game. But coming out of that, I was hoping that I would have an opportunity to work with the organization after graduating from law school. And so I knocked on the door of the then commissioner and, said, hey, is there any shot that I would have a job? And they were in the process of relocating from Los Angeles to New York. And so he said, well, listen, there's only two things in life that are for certain, death and taxes, but I'm pretty sure that we will have a job for you. And so I said, great, pretty sure as in don't look for another job while I'm, studying for the bar exam, or pretty sure as in maybe. And so he kind of laughed and ushered me out of the office. And then that was it. I prepared for the bar that summer, continued reaching back out to them beyond that, and never heard back at that point. He did connect me with the general manager of the Los Angeles Galaxy because I was in LA at the time, and they did offer me a position within their front office in public relations, I think it was. But coming out with over $100K in debt and taking a job that paid $28,000-$30,000 a year, something like that, just wasn't going to be financially feasible. It wasn't even a legal job. So I was kind of stranded at that point and did what everybody else at that point has to do, right? Is start scouring the paper and try to find a job. And so I did. I landed in a litigation boutique in Santa Monica that did a lot of medical malpractice litigation for the universities in that area, insurance defense, and learned a lot about litigation and the process and working with entities, and decided that it was counter to everything that I just described to you earlier in terms of what I wanted to do. And so I knew I needed to make a break at that point. I had coached soccer when I was in law school. A couple of the parents had started a video production company. Again, going to be dating myself here because it was direct to consumer, like VHS tapes. right? You know what those are, Chris, right?
I'm old enough to know what those are.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah. So they would be at the warehouse or Sam Goodies or something like that, where you could go rent your videos. But at the front, they would have these, $20 videos where you would get the Kobe Jones story or some of these U.S. national team soccer players. And so they did direct to consumer productions. And so they asked me, hey, can you help us with the formation of an LLC? Again, I was kind of green out of law school, hadn't done it before, but answered the way every lawyer, I'm sure, on your podcast would answer and said, sure, yeah, I can do that. Absolutely. And so put that together and then, help them with their rights clearances and things like that. And so got a call from a producer at Fox Sports. He was working on a documentary for the World Cup where he needed somebody to help him again clear rights. Well, I had just done that for Big Shot Films. So I stepped into that role and we worked on putting together these World Cup preview shows for Fox Sports World, which at the time I think later became Fox Soccer Channel and then something else, but did that for him. He introduced me to the woman who headed business affairs at the talent agency, Writers and Artists. So I worked at the talent agency for 2 years. I can't say that I had a particular interest in entertainment law per se, but the opportunity to stay in entertainment and sports was important to me. Again, back to doing something that I was passionate about and excited about. And so I worked there for a couple of years, and a weird thing started to happen. Towards the end of my tenure there, we started taking these meetings from these athletes and their agents who were looking to cross over from just sports to also entertainment. So that was right around the time that I think like Troy Aikman did a show on Coach. And so we were taking meetings from athletes who wanted to be on shows like Saved by the Bell and other, TV shows that were on. And so we were working with the talent side to integrate that. And so it was great for me because the sports side was coming back out on the entertainment side, and that was great. And so those are kind of the early days, if you will, career-wise. I met my wife at that point, and then I took a dramatic turn and ended up coming to the Midwest to work for a company called The Finish Line, which was a publicly traded athletic retailer at the time.
Hi, listeners. This is Chris Batts, legal recruiter and owner of the Lion Group. My team and I place legal and compliance talent around the United States and are known for our level of communication, speed, and strong track record. If you're an employer hiring your first attorney or first general counsel or adding talent to your corporate legal department or compliance team, we should talk. Also, if you're a corporate defense law partner or group wondering about your options for a lateral move, we should also talk. Every aspect of our process is confidential, fast, and thorough. Contact us by going to our website, findthelions.com, or you can text the word headhunter to the number 44222, and then complete the web form and we'll follow up with you shortly. Now back to the show. Share about how that opportunity came up to go work for Finish Line.
I took some time right after we completed our second pilot season, which pilot season was from January to May. And so after pilot season had ended, we had time during the summer. I had met my wife, who was not my wife at the time, but she was from the Midwest. We were kind of starting to progress as a couple. And so, we were starting to figure things out, like where we were going to live and things like that. And so it was important for her that she remain close to her mom and her family in the Midwest. And so I liken it to, I don't know if you've ever seen that Nicolas Cage movie called The Family Man.
The Family Man.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
It is.
And so it was one of those fork in the road type decisions that you have to make in life. And I decided that my life would be better served with her than without her. And so I started exploring my opportunities in the Midwest. And so I was fortunate that I was able to get this job with Finish Line, which was an athletic specialty retailer. They had gone public fairly recent. And so they were transitioning from a kind of a mom and pop organization that just was growing really big, really fast, to now being publicly traded and having all of these additional layers of regulation on them and growing. And so you had these sectors now, or business units, that had their own strategies. And so as a lawyer with a business mindset, it was really easy to kind of jump in and be like, okay, what are you guys trying to accomplish in real estate? How do we help you from a legal perspective? What are you guys trying to accomplish in e-commerce? How are we going to help you from a legal perspective? And so I look at it as that is where I got my training, if you will, for being a corporate generalist, which is going to be critical to the sports career, because you're really just learning a lot about the different areas of a corporate business and their goals. And so IP, real estate, all that stuff.
So did they give you the role of general counsel immediately, or did you grow into that?
No, I started in, I think, as an assistant counsel, and then kind of progressed up the ladder from there.
Yeah. Because, I mean, you weren't formally trained in a law firm in public company securities and law. Was that is that something that you learned as you were going? Technically, a lot of these big publicly traded companies tend to have that securities trained lawyer from a law firm, but you didn't have that, which is a neat story.
Right. The general counsel, he was the one who had it at the time when he hired me into that organization. Mm-hmm. But to your point, right, you're like learning it. And I'm kind of, I keep that sponge mentality of, listen, I know what I know, but there's probably a lot more that I should know. And so I'm always looking to learn, and you work with outside counsel, you develop relationships, you start to figure out where you're good at and where you could use help at. And then when you're getting that help, you take the time and the opportunity to learn it, and you learn it from the best in the industry so that you're picking up the knowledge, and then you go to conferences and things like that, and you continue to learn and grow and develop your skill set.
So question for you, how long were you general counsel at the finish line?
Well, I wasn't. I was the VP of corporate legal affairs. So okay. Yeah. So the role grew as my boss ended up growing, and he later transitioned into CAO role, which opened up a lot more legal responsibilities for me within the legal department.
Got it. Talk about a little bit about the challenges of the responsibilities you had. So going through that decade at the finish line, I mean, retail was hit pretty hard. What were some of the challenges you had as they grew so quickly within the real estate world and doing the business of retail sports?
Well, it was, to your point, I mean, there were a lot of things that were happening throughout that time, right? So retail in general was pretty cyclical, or is pretty cyclical. I don't know what commercial retail looks like now in this post-COVID apocalyptic, I don't know what kind of, world that we're living in now, where I don't even know what the mall scene is going to be like going forward. But I mean, at the time, retail traffic in malls was big, but we had different things. We were beneficiaries of a spat that took place between Foot Locker and Nike. And so, that created opportunities. We acquired a company and developed a business on the urban retail side of the house. We tried to launch a women's only athletic boutique throughout that process. We were in the process of acquiring a different organization, which that deal ended up not going through, but that created a lot of legal exposure and issues associated with that as we, A, wound into it, and B, try to unwind out of it. And so there were a lot of those types of challenges along the way. But again, it's about growing, increasing foot traffic, developing a brand, and brand loyalty, things that you need in order to be successful in that space.
What was it like being a part of a public company? Most of your ventures prior were pretty private, so curious.
It was Look, for me, I always try to go in and see the benefits and the positives. And so it was a lot about learning about the different areas, like when you're dealing with the shareholder meetings or investor calls and things like that, making sure that Sarbanes-Oxley was big. And so making sure that you were doing everything that you needed to do to be compliant on that front. Again, my mindset is more of a how do you be proactive? How do you try to foresee issues before they arrive? I'm a big preacher, if you will, of like preventative legal, right? So, which is good in the sense that it creates smooth sailing. It gets a little problematic when it comes time to trying to justify and your worth and what you're bringing to an organization if you're avoiding a lot of the issues that come up, but that's important.
How did the USA Track and Field GC role come to you?
So this is bringing the story back to fruition in terms of that CEO whose door I knocked at when he was at Major League Soccer became the CEO. He was the commissioner, of Major League Soccer, was CEO of USA Track and Field at the time. And so when I learned that there might be an opportunity within USA Track and Field and to get back directly in sports and entertainment, I worked my network to try to facilitate a meeting with him to have that discussion and kind of reminisce really about soccer and everything that has transpired in the whatever it was 15 years or so since I was an intern to where I was there. So we ended up meeting at what I would call a Laker game, but most of the people in Indiana would call a Pacers game. And so we got together and chatted about it, and he indicated that he was looking to make a change within his legal department and was looking for somebody with a very heavy business mindset to help elevate the profile of the sport and to start trying to execute on some of the things that some of the vision that he had in terms of strategy and success. And so it was a good conversation. I remember, and I jokingly say, I made a comment about, I wonder what the statute of limitations would be on a job offer, right? And so, but I mean, he was good. The opportunity presented itself. And then I became hired as the General Counsel and Chief of Business Affairs for USA Track and Field.
Let's just riff for a moment on two different topics. So what's your opinion about the progression of MLS soccer in the United States? Definitely, there's been growth. And do you think we're going to become the next premier country, kind of like what Europe's doing and how has exploded with financially?
I don't know, because the business model of Major League Soccer is different. And so you have to look at the roots of that single entity structure that sprung forth the league. So soccer had failed commercially in the United States before MLS, right? The NASL, and there were other leagues that just failed to thrive within the United States. And so MLS had, at the time, there were a lot of lawyers within their senior leadership. And there was a kind of a joke that called it like MLS stood for mostly lawyer soccer, right? And so the approach that they did with the single entity to control costs and to have investor operators. So what's different about MLS is free agents, in essence, weren't negotiating with individual teams. They were negotiating with the league, and then the league, had the allocations and stuff for the different teams. And so that was the crux of the single entity structure. It was built based on the antitrust legal decisions that were in the Supreme Court in other sports cases that were being litigated, before them, in terms of what, how leagues and entities survived antitrust scrutiny. And so they used that methodology to create this single entity structure for the league. And so look, they have gone from 10 teams to close to 30, I think now. I'm not sure. They've got their soccer specific stadiums. They've got a thriving business model. They've got their television deals that are coming through. Their attendance numbers are really good. So there's a lot to be excited about in terms of the viability of soccer, and it's growing in terms of participation numbers within the United States and things like that. So I think soccer's got a very bright future here. I think it's working its way into the upper echelon of the United States in terms of top sports. But I don't know, again, this is just my perspective, but I don't know if they have the same, like, we want to be bigger than the Premier League, we want to be bigger than La Liga or something like that. But also, again, it's different. I mean, I've read that they've had discussions with other countries within our region, like Mexico and Canada, about creating kind of a similar structure to Europe so that they can compete dollar-wise with the contracts that are taking place in Europe and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how they develop that business. But the good news for them right now is that they continue to be a thriving sports property, and the numbers are trending in the right direction.
Yeah. Again, a pivot. You talked about your network, and that was important for you and how you landed the role in the USA Track and Field. What advice would you give lawyers, you could say law students, who want to get into the business of sports in regards to landing roles and working a network? What advice would you give?
Well, I mean, number one, a network, as you know, is incredibly important. And I don't feel like law students value it in the way that they probably would/should. So when I talk to law students and speak at law schools, that is one of the things. I mean, my parents, as I said, were immigrants into this country, and they didn't know anybody, and neither did I. I mean, I for a while, I had kept a lot of the rejection letters and stuff like that I had written all throughout, trying to get a sniff at some of these potential legal jobs with professional sports teams. And this was before a lot of them even had general counsel. But the crux of it is that you want to be able to have that network. You want to be able to know people in sports. And so the Sports Lawyers Association does a great job of putting on an annual conference. Again, COVID aside, but they do a great job of putting on an annual conference, which is literally a who's who. And so if you're if you're interested in sports and you're in law school, you want to make sure you attend that conference just to start the process of meeting people. Then you want to meet people locally, right? Lawyers love talking about themselves. We're filling up a podcast here and I haven't taken a breath yet, right? So they love talking about themselves. And so I encourage them to do informational interviews while they're in law school. Start cultivating their network, start doing some of the things that they're going to need to have later on. And so you spend, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in your education to have a slush fund budget of money to buy people coffee and lunches just to kind of hear their story and start making those connections, I think is incredibly important. And so I feel like you definitely need to put a conscious focus on developing that network and continuing the dialogue. I mean, I look forward to conferences where I get to meet people. Some people that I'm connected with, I don't get to see, but I'll send an occasional email or text, just, hey, how you doing? How's life? How's life treating you? Those types of things, because you just never know. And then when the opportunity arises and there's an opening in their organization, that's where you want to be able to lean on that contact and say, hey, I saw you guys have an opening for, whatever, do you think, is there any information you can help provide? Because a lot of students just think like, hey, if you're constantly asking people for jobs, like I get a lot of those, like, do you guys have jobs in your legal department? And the answer is generally no. So you want to stay top of mind, but you don't want to be asking the question that the answer 99% of the time is no.
Yeah. Great advice, and I appreciate all those takeaways. Norm, let's go back to this role that you have currently now. And when you joined a little bit more than 10 or 11 years ago, explain to my listeners what you do. So, USA Track and Field, it's a unique entity. It's not a sports team. Somehow we feel like it's associated with the Olympics. Can you just give my listeners an overview of what this looks like for you? And you do it from the business side, which again is helping them understand what that means, and the legal side.
Right. So USA Track and Field is the national governing body for the sport. The national federation, if you will. And so we do everything from the millions of runners that are weekend warriors on the grassroots side. Think of it like a pyramid, all the way to the top of the pyramid, which are the elite athletes that compete at world championships and the Olympic Games. And so it encompasses masters, it encompasses youth. And so you've got all these demographics and programs that all feel part. And we ran a campaign a couple of years ago where it was like, we are USATF, because it encompasses so many different individuals and perspectives in the sport. And then, so my role, again, in the GC legal role, is transactional work, right? Intellectual property work, risk management, SafeSport compliance, which has been very big of late. We run the agent program. We run the anti-doping program, trans eligibility issues, the P1 visas, and, getting, whenever we have certain events within the United States where international athletes are coming in, or sometimes they want to come and train. So we deal with those issues, which have also gotten complicated over the last couple of years. Grievance monitoring within corporate governance, which is an area that I've spent a lot of time and focus on. Corporate governance, you read about it in the papers a lot, in terms of how organizations have been either properly or improperly governing themselves, right? This is on the heels of like the IOC issues from several years ago. And our international federation had corruption issues. FIFA had corruption issues. So, governance in sport is a very big topic. It's been an area that I've stressed a lot. I've been fortunate also to have been selected on the governance commission for our international federation, which is World Athletics. They have a commitment, like USA Track and Field does, in order to be a preeminent organization when it comes to governance. And so figuring out what those best practices are and trying to be leaders is where they're focused. And so I've been fortunate to be on their governance commission as they're working through their constitution and some of the other issues there. So that's a real important area.
Where do you guys get your money from? Where does the revenue come from?
Well, it comes from various sources. Sponsorship, obviously, is a key source. Membership is a key source. Sanctioning events throughout the sport is big. Coaching education. There's the USOPC when it comes to funding for our elite athlete programs. They provide support. So there's a lot of different areas that contributes to our overall revenue.
So you brought up some sensitive subjects that have been definitely newsworthy. So anti-doping, you mentioned SafeSports. Could you share a little bit about those two? We might jump in a couple others. We'd love to hear what you're being faced with.
Yeah, well, you've got like 60 minutes of a podcast here. And
I know.
Those are like 60-minute topics in and of themselves, right?
Try a minute each.
Yeah, so doping has been something that has plagued the sport for the longest time. And so working with the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency to make sure that we walk the line between compliance and ensuring that we create clean sport for our athletes to compete in, because our athletes are negatively affected when people are not abiding by the rules and doing things to skirt the rules. And so that has been an area replete with issues over the years, as has SafeSport. I mean, you referenced the news that came out of gymnastics, right, within the last couple of years. And so it has spawned congressional inquiries. It has spawned, changes in federal legislation. It has changed completely the way that youth sports are administered, and not just youth sports, but the way athletes are treated throughout the Olympic movement, which is important and needed to be done. And so, again, try to be ahead of the curve, try to make sure that you're in line with best practices, try to be leaders in the industry.
I know gender has been something that's been pretty intense coming up, especially in the Olympics. I mean, how are you guys facing that?
Well, it's front and center in our sport as we've had to deal with some of those issues. And I got to tell you, being in some of those meetings where you're really contemplating, like, what is the definition of gender? I mean, I'll ask you real quick, just kind of facetiously, and then I'll explain. But I mean, is it anatomy? Is it hormones? Is it chromosomes? Because you've got all of these things come into play, right? If you have somebody who has a Y chromosome, but female anatomy, is that a male or a female?
Man, I don't envy being in your shoes right now. So it's definitely challenging.
And that's totally independent of some of the social issues that deal with identification, right? In terms of how individuals are identifying gender-wise, which adds another wrinkle to that analysis. But it is challenging. I mean, it causes you to question a lot of things, and it's all being sorted out. There's cases that have been arbitrated here that have tried to tackle those very issues, and our international federation tried to come out with rules in those particular situations that said, hey, like in the one I just kind of referenced, where a female athlete has a Y chromosome, but yet is female, but her hormone levels range in the male category and outside like the spectrum of what would define someone as, at least in their view, as female, right? So they said, okay, well, if you want to compete in certain of these events where we have empirical scientific evidence to show that you would gain a little bit of an advantage because of testosterone or other factors, then the International Federation said, well, maybe you need to hormone suppress to get yourself within that range so that you can compete in those events. And the athlete said, well, no, I don't know that I need to do that, that I'm comfortable doing that. So these are complicated issues that continue to evolve as we continue to confront them.
So incredibly challenging. You're right in the kind of front lines of these really important questions. Norm, let's pivot to your leadership style. You've been called a builder of culture, and I'd like to hear from you how you go about that in organizations. Please share your style.
I appreciate the question too, because I think it's really important that organizationally there's alignment, right? So there needs to be clarity of vision in terms of, what we're doing as an organization. Are we staying true to our mission statement? And then what is the role of each stakeholder within the organization, their role in the strategic plan, and how they do that. So that's part one, like creating that kind of vision clarity. And then part two is, how do you motivate and get people energized and focused so that they're performing at their best and they're involved. And that's kind of where, that collaborative, team building, like let's try to get on the same page here. Encourage, you don't want to surround yourself with yes people. You want to encourage diversity of thought, people challenging the direction that we're going in a respectful way, but that forces you to defend the position that you're bringing up. And so when people are constantly, I hate to use the word defend, but justifying their business decision or their ideas, I think that leads to more conviction in following through with those things, which I think only helps. You get people more invested in that regard. And then, in terms of culture, it's like, what are you trying to create in your work environment in terms of hard work, dedication, kind of a humility towards your work ethic, so that you're hard. It's almost a hard on the work, soft on the people, right? You want to be human. You want to get to know who you're working with and what motivates them, what makes them tick. At the same time, making sure that we're all aligned in terms of why we're here when we're here.
You mentioned using analytics. How do you use analytics when you do that?
In a lot of different ways. So I'll try to be brief in terms of that, but like from a straight legal, like I can recall like a time at finish line where it was, we did analytics on all the types of litigation claims that we had. Okay. And so we started to see a trend in uptick on ladder safety issues within the back room. And so you go and you look at these cases, you see how much it costs to defend them. Okay. And then once you have that, to get your CEO to get excited about ladder safety, that's, he's a yawn and you get ushered out of the room. But if you come in with a very analytics focus, okay, well, ladder safety claims cost us, I don't know, I'm just going to make up numbers, but $50,000 to $90,000 or whatever to defend. Okay. So how much do we need to generate in top line sales in order to have that 50 to 90,000 to spend on defending this type of claim? Okay. So now if we've reduced it by 30 some odd percent or X number of claims, now this is how much money now in top line sales is not being used for this expense. And then that's a benefit. And that gets, generally gets a little bit more attention. And so looking at it from that perspective, we've looked at it from a litigation perspective. And I'm sure you've had a lot of GCs on these podcasts talk about the way that they use analytics to look at how they manage their total legal spend in terms of the law firms that they use and how much it costs to do that. We did things where we were consolidating some of the discovery for different types of cases. If you had one law firm that knows how to fill out, those things, and now you've got more efficiency in that. And as a GC, your role is to run that particular business unit, and you need to run it as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And so you're trying to drive that number as close to zero as you can without hindering the business's ability to generate revenue.
Let's pivot to public speaking. So you've been invited domestically and internationally to speak quite a bit. Norm, I'd love for you to share advice, because I'm sure you weren't a perfect public speaker when you started and you may not have arrived still, but what's some advice that you could give to folks who are being invited to these events or could be invited to the events or may want to go to these events? This is what works for me.
Yeah. Well, I would probably agree with you. I probably have yet to arrive there. But a lot of times for a while, I was opening with this joke where I would take my cell phone camera out and I'd take a picture of the audience. And I would make the joke that nobody at home really cares whatever I have to say. So it's always intriguing for me to come back home and say, hey, there are actually people that care about what I do and what I have to say, right? But to your point, I think, being prepared, number one, first and foremost, is incredibly important. I mean, if I get blessed to get an opportunity to speak at a conference and share my perspective and insights on a particular topic, I definitely make sure that I take the time to prepare so that I have certain points that I will convey and back that up. Two is generally, speaking from the heart, in terms of if you're passionate about a topic and it's important and it speaks to what you've been doing and what you're about, it's generally, for me, it's been pretty easy to talk about those things because it resonates and it means some things and it's what you've done. So I will turn them down if I don't feel like, hey, this is an area that I'm comfortable speaking on. But I've tried to focus on areas where we've had leadership positions. So when our agent program was preeminent within the movement, so I got to speak a lot on that. And I actually go in there coming out expecting to learn as much as I'm contributing. And so you hear about the perspective of other speakers. You try to get together for a drink or dinner before or after, again, to kind of learn from their side of it. Because I always feel like I never know enough. It's that generalist mentality where you feel like you know just enough to be dangerous, but not quite enough. And so I'm always looking to gain more information. And so that would be probably the key takeaways that I would share on that front.
Norm, how do you define leadership?
Leadership, that's a great question. I would probably define it in terms of, are you able to energize a group to accomplish a particular objective? And so it's leadership, not just by words, but by actions. It's creating the right culture that fosters the success that you're trying to accomplish. And I feel like, again, you read a lot of books about leaders can have really great ideas, but that doesn't always translate into execution or the way that they interact with individuals. And there are a lot of components, both on the hard skill side and on the soft skill side, that you've got to continue to develop. And I remember attending like a seminar on negotiation like early in my career, and it's like, negotiation is a craft. It's a skill. You got to continue to work on that. I feel the same way about like leadership. It's a skill. You've got to continue to work on that because the workforce is evolving, right? We've gone from Gen X to Gen Y to Gen Z to millennials to I don't know what we're dealing with now. And the approach that people take is very different. And, it would be great to lead the A team on to battle every week or every day, but sometimes you don't have the A team. So you've got to lead the team that you have. And so how you get the best out of everybody on that unit is probably, to me, central to that definition of leadership.
Norm, who has been examples of leadership for you?
There have been a lot. I don't know that I want to like start naming them off the top of my head here because I fear that if I leave someone out, I will regret it. But there have been a lot of folks along the way that I have come across that I have tried to glean. A lot of mentors. I mean, it's important to surround yourself with people who are really smart and really motivated and have unique experiences where you can continue to ideate with them and learn and grow, and people who will push you. I mean, I'm one of those people that wants to be pushed. I mean, I feel like I've gotten to where I've gotten, not so much. I mean, it's hard work and a lot of the other cliches, but a lot of it has been by allowing myself to continue to get pushed. I never feel like I'm an expert on anything, although a lot of people will say, well, you're, the preeminent guy or, whatever on this thing. And that's great. And it's flattering, but it goes back to what we were talking about early. Like my mindset is almost very sports oriented. And so you've got a guy like Tom Brady who wins his 7th Super Bowl, wakes up the next morning and starts talking about what do we got to do to improve the team for next year? How are we going to be better? And so that's kind of been the same mindset of like, okay, this is great. We've accomplished a lot. That's great. But what do I got to do to get better? What are things that I could be improving on? If you see something, that you think that I need to improve on, then tell me, because I want to know. It's not criticism, it's constructive feedback.
What books would you recommend to my listeners that maybe have been on your bookshelf that you've read?
I would say, again, going back to that sports theme, I have certain books that I think philosophically represent a lot of my true core beliefs. And these are like old school books because, with 5 kids, it's been a while since I've had a lot of reading flexibility. But Pat Riley wrote a book called The Winner Within, which I thought was really good. Rick Pitino wrote a book called Success is a Choice that I thought was really good. Stephen Covey has written a lot of good books, which I think are really good. There's a book called The Oz Principle that talks about, again, within corporate settings, how to conduct yourselves in certain ways and how to be accountable and how to stay focused on that, which I thought were good. There's a book I remember calling it like Crucial Conversations. I mean, like those types of things. I am trying to read the first 90 days now, again, learning as a new leader, if you transition into a role, like what are things you need to be trying to do to improve and learn and get up to speed and gain key alliances within an organization so that you can do what you need to do in order to effectuate good leadership.
I understand you have a family and married with kids?
Yes, yeah, that I do. Correct.
What's the age of your oldest and your youngest?
My oldest is 17, about to head off to college.
Okay.
My youngest is 3. Hopefully about to head off to preschool.
Preschool.
So,
I have a 3-year-old too, so I understand the urgency to get them out of
yeah.
out to school.
It makes for awkward parent-teacher conference nights where you're walking around with a infant or whatever at the high school, and everybody's giving you those looks, and you want to sit there and be like, this kid's very gifted, but we're not here to talk about him.
So do you have strong opinions about where your kids should go to college?
I actually don't. I mean, I've been very hands-off in that sense. I want them to go what makes them happy. I mean, the advice that I continue to give to them is to pursue their passion. So, they don't have to worry about anything else except focusing their educational pursuits on what it is that they're going to be passionate about. And I try to encourage them, look, if you're passionate about something and you're willing to work hard at it, then the chances are that you're going to be successful. So we kind of joke about it in terms of as they approach it, we do like a Shark Tank. If this is like their thing, they got to make their pitch to my wife and I as to why they want to choose X over Y or whatever. And then justify it, kind of going back to those principles that we were talking about earlier, getting them not in a critical manner, but they really got to defend, like, okay, well, why do you want to go to this out-of-state school? Why should we be paying out-of-state tuition? What's going to be the benefit of that? Like, how do you think that that's going to be different from this other school? Again, not from a critical perspective, because in the end, we're going to be supportive of what they want to pursue, but really forcing them or him right now to think through, like, hey, is this really what I want to be doing? And does this really make sense in the grand scheme of things?
So no strong opinion, IU, Purdue, Notre Dame.
No, see, I grew up in Southern California, so I have a left coast bias, if you will, and so I never quite got. I mean, I teach at IU. I'm an adjunct at IU, but I mean, each of those schools are really good schools. They have different specialties within them, and so one of them is in consideration right now for my son as well, because the major fits within what he's looking to pursue, and it's highly reputable, and so that's something that he's considering, but he's not getting any push from us in terms of where to go there.
Good job. So Norm, last question. Go back to the days of being an aspired athlete.
Yes.
And if you choose your own adventure, what team would have wanted to be a professional player in, and what position?
Well, that's an easy question, and unfortunately, it doesn't pertain to the sport. I played soccer, as I told you to, but if I was going to honestly answer your question, it would be quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah. It's America's team. And I grew up a Cowboys fan for, since as long as I can remember. And those that did well for them tend to be pretty successful individuals. Roger Staubach, Troy Aikman, even Tony Romo in the booth. So they tend to do pretty well for themselves. So you could do a lot worse than that role.
You could. Norm, it's been an honor and a pleasure today. Thank you for your time.
Hey, thank you so much again for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone who listened to this episode of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. If you haven't already, please take a moment and subscribe. Also, we would love your feedback. You can leave feedback in 3 easy ways. You can go to the blog post on our website. You can click Give Feedback link in the show notes on your device. And then thirdly, you can text the phrase LFL podcast to the number 44222. That's LFL PODCAST. And thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. This podcast is for education purposes only. This content cannot be used for commercial use without written permission from the Lion Group. If you like this podcast, leave a review on iTunes.